I thought it was just a casual family brunch until my mother-in-law slid a heavy document across the table. "Just sign it," she said with a sweet smile, "to prove you are not after the $5 million trust." But as I read the fine print, I realized this was not about protecting their son. It was about stripping me of my rights. They had no idea I had brought my own folder, and mine was far more dangerous. My name is Madeline Rios. In the climate-controlled chaos of Marrowline Logistics, where I spent 50 hours a week as the operations manager, my voice carried weight. I was 34 years old, managing supply chains that spanned 3 continents and moved millions of dollars in freight. If a shipment was delayed in Hamburg, I was the one who decided how to reroute it. If a client in Tokyo needed an update, I was the one crafting the strategy. At my desk in downtown Charlotte, I was competent, I was respected, I was in charge. But the moment I drove my sedan through the wrought iron gates of the Hale estate, barely 20 minutes from my office, I ceased to be Madeline Rios, the capable professional. I shrank. I became Graham's wife. Or more accurately, I became a variable that needed to be managed, a potential error in the perfectly calculated algorithm of the Hale family legacy. It was a humid Tuesday evening in late September, when the suffocating nature of my marriage truly settled into my bones. Though the signs had been there since the wedding, Graham and I were heading to his parents' house for dinner. It was not a special occasion. It was simply Tuesday. In the world of Douglas and Cynthia Hale, Tuesday meant family dinner, and attendance was not a request. It was a line item on a social contract I had never actually seen, but was expected to uphold. Graham sat in the passenger seat of my car, scrolling through his phone. He was a good man in the way that domesticated animals are good. He was gentle, handsome in a soft, unthreatening way, and fundamentally terrified of disappointing the 2 people waiting for us inside that sprawling brick mansion. "Do you think your mother will mind that I did not have time to change?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the road. The traffic on Providence Road was heavy, a river of red taillights bleeding into the dusk. "I came straight from the warehouse. I smell like cardboard and industrial cleaner." Graham glanced up, offering that practiced, placating smile that I used to mistake for calmness. "You look fine, Maddie. Don't overthink it. Mom just wants to see us. She is just happy we are coming." He was lying. Of course, Cynthia Hale was never just happy. She was observant. She was critical. And she was a master of the backhanded compliment that hit you with the force of a velvet-wrapped brick. When we pulled into the driveway, the house loomed over us. It was a beautiful structure, perfectly symmetrical, manicured to within an inch of its life. The landscaping was so precise it looked artificial, the boxwoods trimmed into sharp, geometric blocks. I parked the car, took a deep breath, and prepared myself for the performance. Cynthia met us at the door. She was a woman who seemed to defy the aging process, not through youthfulness, but through sheer rigidity. Her hair was a helmet of blonde perfection, and she wore a silk blouse that probably cost more than my first car. "Madeline," she said, her voice light and airy, like wind chimes in a graveyard. She leaned in to air-kiss my cheek, ensuring no actual skin contact occurred. "Oh, look at you, still in your work clothes. You must be exhausted. I always tell Douglas how much I admire your stamina. I do not know how you handle all that grit and grime every day." There it was, the opening salvo. It sounded like praise, but the subtext was clear. You are dirty, you are working class, you do not belong in this foyer. "It was a busy day, Cynthia," I said, forcing a smile that made my jaw ache. "Supply chain issues do not really pause for dinner." "Of course, dear," she said, ushering us into the living room where Douglas was already seated with a tumbler of bourbon. "I just worry about you. A woman needs to preserve her energy. You do not want to burn out before you even start a family." I felt my spine stiffen. The topic of children was a battlefield I was not ready to step onto tonight. Douglas looked up from his iPad. He was a large man, taking up space not just physically but atmospherically. He did not smile. He rarely smiled. To Douglas Hale, Smiling was a sign of low intelligence or weak negotiating leverage. "Graham," Douglas said, acknowledging his son with a nod, completely ignoring me. "I saw the market reports. The trust portfolio is up 2% this quarter. We need to discuss the reallocation before the end of the month." "Hi, Dad," Graham said, sinking into the sofa, instantly reverting to a teenage posture. "Sure, whatever you think is best." "I do not pay you to tell me what I think is best," Douglas snapped, though his tone was flat, devoid of heat. "I expect you to read the documents this time." I sat in the wingback chair, the one with the stiff upholstery that discouraged relaxation. "I can help you look over the reports." "Graham," I offered. "You know financial analysis is part of my background." Douglas turned his head slowly, his eyes landing on me as if he had just noticed a stain on the rug. "That will not be necessary. Madeline, family finances are a private matter. We have advisors for that. You have enough to worry about with your boxes." I gripped the armrest. Boxes. I managed a logistics network that kept regional hospitals stocked with surgical equipment. But to Douglas, I was just moving boxes. "Dinner is served," Cynthia announced, saving me from having to respond. The dining room was set with the good china. It was always the good china. We sat in our assigned places. I had learned early on never to sit at the head or the foot of the table. Those spots belonged to the patriarch and matriarch. I sat on the side, exposed. "I ordered that catering from Le Bremner," Cynthia said as she served a salad that looked too beautiful to eat. "I know you said you wanted to try that new Mexican fusion place downtown for your birthday next week, Madeline. But I thought about it, and really, spicy food is so aggressive on the stomach. Le Bremner is classic. I went ahead and booked the private room for us." I paused, my fork hovering over the arugula. My birthday. The one thing I had explicitly expressed a preference for. I had told Graham 2 weeks ago that I just wanted tacos and margaritas. Something loud and fun and unpretentious. "Cynthia," I said, keeping my voice level, "that is very generous. But I was really looking forward to the other place. I have heard great things about their chef." Cynthia smiled, a pitying expression that suggested I was a toddler asking for candy for dinner. "Oh, Madeline, you say that now, but you would have hated it. It is loud, and the parking is a nightmare. Besides, I already sent out the invitations to the cousins. We cannot change it now. It would be rude." I looked at Graham. This was the moment. This was where a husband was supposed to say, "Actually, Mom, it is Maddie's birthday, and if she wants tacos, we are getting tacos." Graham looked down at his plate, pushing a cherry tomato around with his fork. "The private room at Le Bremner is nice, Maddie," he mumbled. "It is really quiet. We can actually talk there." The betrayal was small, microscopic even, but it cut deep. It was not about the tacos. It was about the fact that my desires, my preferences, even on the one day of the year dedicated to me, were treated as incorrect suggestions. I was being edited. My life was being redlined by Cynthia Hale. "I suppose," I said, the fight draining out of me. "Thank you, Cynthia." "You are welcome, dear," she beamed. "I always know what you really need. You are just too busy to see it sometimes." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of polite conversation that felt more like a deposition. Douglas grilled Graham on his golf game, criticizing his swing. Cynthia asked me questions about my family in Florida, but interrupted every answer with a better anecdote about someone she knew who lived in Palm Beach. "By the way," Cynthia said as we were finishing the lemon tart, "I noticed on the shared calendar that you have a doctor's appointment next Thursday at 2 in the afternoon." I froze. I had put that on my private digital calendar. I had not shared it with her. I looked at Graham. He shrugged helplessly. "I just wanted to make sure you are okay," Cynthia continued, her voice dripping with that weaponized concern. "Is it feminine issues? Because Dr. Albright is the best in the city, and I can get you in with him instead. You really should not be seeing just anyone." "It is just a dental cleaning, Cynthia," I lied. "It was actually a consultation with a therapist." something I had been working up the courage to do for months because the stress of this family was starting to affect my sleep. "Oh," she said, looking disappointed. "Well, make sure you reschedule it. We need you to pick up the dry cleaning for Douglas's gala suit on Thursday afternoon. The driver is off." "I am working on Thursday," I said. "I have a quarterly review." "Nonsense," Douglas interjected. "You can leave early. It is just logistics. It is not brain surgery. Family comes first. Madeline, you need to learn to prioritize." "Graham can pick it up," I said, my voice rising slightly. "Graham is busy," Douglas said, closing the subject. "He has obligations." I looked at Graham again. He was wiping his mouth with a linen napkin, avoiding my gaze. "I can probably—" he started. "No, Graham," Cynthia cut him off softly. "You have your tennis lesson. You need to relax. Madeline does not mind. Do you, Madeline? It is just a small favor." The air in the room felt thin. They were doing it again. They were carving away pieces of my autonomy, slice by slice, and serving it back to me as duty. If I said no, I was the difficult one. I was the ungrateful daughter-in-law. If I said yes, I was confirming that my time, my career, and my dignity were secondary to Douglas's tuxedo. "I will see what I can do," I said finally. It was a surrender. As we drove home that night, the silence in the car was heavy. Graham turned on the radio, some soft jazz station that his parents listened to. He was already morphing into them. "You could have said something," I said, staring out at the dark silhouette of the oak trees passing by. "About the birthday dinner, about the dry cleaning. Why make a scene?" Graham sighed, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "It makes them happy. Maddie, it is not a big deal. Le Bremner is a 5-star restaurant. Most people would kill to eat there." "It is not about the stars, Graham," I said, feeling a familiar exhaustion settle behind my eyes. "It is about the fact that I do not get a vote in anything, not in where we eat, not in how we spend our holidays, not even in my own schedule." "You are overreacting," he said, his voice taking on a hint of Douglas's dismissive tone. "They just want to help. They love us. You are lucky to have in-laws who care this much. My mom is she is just being a mom." "She is not my mom," I whispered. "Well, she is the only one you have got here," he said. I looked at him, really looked at him, in the glow of the dashboard lights. He was 35 years old, but he was still a child in that house, and he wanted me to be a child too. He wanted me to play in the nursery that Cynthia and Douglas had built for us, surrounded by expensive toys and high walls. But I was not a child. I was a grown woman who managed supply chains for Fortune 500 companies. I knew how to spot a bottleneck. I knew how to identify a liability. And as we pulled into the garage of the townhouse that Douglas had bought for us, under a trust in Graham's name, of course, I realized something terrifying. I was not a partner in this family. I was not a beloved addition. I was a risk. I was an outsider who had infiltrated the perimeter, and every dinner, every changed reservation, every small favor was a containment strategy. They were managing me. And the scary part was, it was working. I was losing myself. I could feel the edges of Madeline Rios blurring, fading into the background of the Hale family portrait. I walked into our kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and looked at the calendar on the fridge. Thursday, pick up Douglas's suit. Cynthia had already written it in. She must have done it while we were getting our coats. I stared at her elegant cursive handwriting. It looked like a command. I took a sponge and wiped it off. It left a faint gray smear. But the words were gone. It was a small, petty act of rebellion. But as I stood there in the quiet of my kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest, I knew it was not enough. I needed more than a sponge. I needed a shield. Because if tonight was any indication, the Hales were not done with me yet. They were just getting started. And I had a sinking feeling that the polite requests were about to turn into demands. 3 weeks after the dinner incident, Cynthia invited us to brunch at the country club. The setting was aggressive in its tranquility. We sat on the patio overlooking the 18th hole, surrounded by men in pastel polos and women who looked like they had been freeze-dried in 1985. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and old money. I should have known it was an ambush. The waiter had barely poured the mimosas when Cynthia reached into her tote bag. She did not pull out a gift or a photo album. She produced a thick cream-colored envelope and placed it on the glass table between the fruit platter and the quiche. "Graham mentioned you two have been thinking about the future," Cynthia said, her voice dripping with that terrifying manufactured sweetness. "Douglas and I want to make sure that future is secure. For everyone." I looked at Graham. He was intently studying the condensation on his water glass, refusing to meet my eyes. My stomach tightened. The last time Graham looked that guilty, he had forgotten to tell me his parents were joining us on our anniversary trip. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my hands in my lap. Douglas answered. He cut into his steak and eggs with surgical precision, not looking up. "It is an insurance policy, essentially, for the family." Cynthia slid the envelope closer to me. "Open it. Madeline, it is wonderful news. Really." I opened the flap and pulled out a stack of documents. The paper was heavy, expensive. At the top, in bold, serif font, were the words, "Hale Family Preservation Trust, Beneficiary. Spousal Waiver and Release." I scanned the first paragraph, then the second. The legal jargon was dense, intentionally designed to be boring, but I dealt with logistics contracts for a living. I knew how to navigate a wall of text. "We have established a trust for Graham," Douglas said, finally wiping his mouth and looking at me. His eyes were cold, assessing. "Upon his 35th birthday next month, the principal becomes active. It is valued at roughly $5 million. $5 million. The number hung in the humid air like a thunderhead. I knew Graham's family was wealthy, but Graham worked as a mid-level consultant. We lived in a nice townhouse, but we certainly did not live like people who had access to $5 million. "That is a lot of money," I said carefully. "It is," Cynthia agreed, beaming as if she had personally printed the bills that morning. "And because it is such a significant amount, we need to make sure it stays where it belongs, within the bloodline." I looked back down at the document. I flipped to page 4. My eyes narrowed. "The undersigned spouse hereby irrevocably waives, releases, and relinquishes any and all right, title, and interest, present or future, legal or equitable, in and to the trust assets." That part was standard. I expected a prenuptial-style agreement regarding inheritance, but as I read further, the language shifted from protective to predatory. "Including but not limited to any consideration of trust income for purposes of spousal support, alimony, or lifestyle maintenance in the event of separation or divorce. The undersigned agrees that any increase in the value of the marital estate derived from trust distributions shall remain the sole property of the beneficiary." It went on. They were not just protecting the principal. They were ensuring that if Graham and I ever divorced, I would not just walk away without the trust money. I would walk away with nothing. Even if Graham used that money to support us for 20 years. They were asking me to sign a document stating that our financial partnership was a fiction. "This is a post-nuptial agreement," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands, "and it is incredibly one-sided." "Oh, do not use such harsh words," Cynthia laughed, waving her hand dismissively. "It is just a formality, Madeline, a standard procedure. The lawyers drafted it up to protect Graham. You know how litigious the world is these days." "Protect him from whom?" I asked. "From me?" "Of course not, dear," Cynthia said, her smile not wavering for a second. "But we have to be realistic. Marriages have ups and downs. We just want to make sure that money does not become a distraction. It is proof, really." "Proof of what?" "Proof that you are here for Graham," she said softly, leaning in. "And not for what he can provide. If you sign this, it shows everyone that your intentions are pure. It puts all the nasty rumors to bed." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Rumors? What rumors?" "People talk. Madeline," Douglas interjected. "A woman from your background, marrying into a family like ours. It raises eyebrows. This document silences them." I looked at Graham. Are you hearing this? Graham finally looked up. He looked miserable, but he also looked resigned. Maddie, please. It is just paper. Dad says the trust cannot be unlocked unless all parties sign. If you do not sign, the money stays frozen. It affects our future, our kids' future. So you knew about this? I asked. We discussed it, Graham mumbled. It is standard wealth management. This clause here, I pointed to paragraph 12, says that I have no right to legal counsel paid for by marital funds if I challenge this agreement later. Do you know what that means, Graham? It means if you divorce me 10 years from now, you can use this $5 million to hire an army of lawyers, and I cannot touch a cent of our joint money to defend myself. You are being dramatic, Douglas snapped. If you do not plan on divorcing him, it does not matter what the paper says. That was the oldest trap in the book. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. But I knew better. In my line of work, you did not sign a contract based on good vibes. You signed based on the worst-case scenario. I cannot sign this today, I said, closing the folder. The temperature at the table dropped 20 degrees. Cynthia's smile vanished. Why not? She asked sharply. It is simple English. It is complex legalese, I corrected, and I need to read it thoroughly. I am not signing away my legal rights between an omelet and a fruit cup. We have a notary coming in 10 minutes, Douglas said, looking at his watch. We arranged this specifically so we could get it done. Graham turns 35 in 2 weeks. The paperwork needs to be filed. Then you should have given it to me 2 weeks ago, I said, standing up. My legs felt weak, but I locked my knees. I am taking this home. Madeline, Cynthia said, her voice dropping an octave. Do not be difficult. You are embarrassing Graham. I glanced at my husband. He was staring at the tablecloth, shrinking into himself. He was not embarrassed. He was terrified. He was letting his parents negotiate the terms of our marriage while he sat there and ate hash browns. I am not being difficult. Cynthia, I said, clutching the folder against my chest like a shield. I am being prudent. Surely, as a business owner, Douglas can respect that. I did not wait for an answer. I turned and walked away, my heels clicking loudly on the pavement. I could feel their eyes on my back, burning holes through my blazer. I did not stop until I reached my car. I sat in the driver's seat, locked the doors, and took a deep breath that sounded more like a sob. I drove home in silence. Graham did not come with me. He stayed behind, presumably to be debriefed by his handlers. When I got to our townhouse, I sat at the kitchen island and read the document again. It was worse than I thought. It gave Douglas asking rights, the ability to audit our household expenses to ensure trust funds were not being misappropriated for my personal use. It essentially made my father-in-law the CFO of my marriage. At 7 p.m, my phone pinged. It was an email notification. Sender: Hale Family Legal via DocuSign. Subject: Urgent. Beneficiary spousal waiver. Signature required. I opened the email. The message was brief and cold. Dear Miss Rios, attached is the digital version of the agreement discussed this morning. Please note that per the stipulations of the trust, all beneficiary requirements must be satisfied 48 hours prior to the vesting date to ensure disbursement. We require your signature no later than 5:00 p.m. tomorrow. Regards, Hale Legal Team. I stared at the screen. 24 hours. They were not giving me time to find a lawyer. They were not giving me time to negotiate. They were banking on the pressure. They thought that by putting a clock on it, by making me the bottleneck to Graham's $5 million, I would crumble. They thought I would be so desperate to prove I was not a gold digger that I would sign a confession saying I was a pauper. I looked at the empty spot on the driveway where Graham's car should have been. He was still at their house. They were probably coaching him right now, telling him how to handle me when he got home. Tell her she's being paranoid. Tell her she is hurting the family. This was not an agreement. This was a hostage situation. I closed my laptop, but I did not delete the email. Instead, I forwarded it to a private external hard drive I kept in my safe. Then I printed a hard copy. My hand reached for my phone, scrolling to a contact I had not spoken to in years but had never deleted. Tessa Ward. We had gone to college together before she went to law school and became a shark in family law. I hesitated. Calling a lawyer felt like crossing a Rubicon. It felt like admitting that my marriage was not a partnership, but a battlefield. Then I looked at the timestamp on the email again. They had sent it 3 hours after I left the brunch. They had not spent that time reflecting on my concerns. They had spent it digitizing the weapon. I pressed call. Madeline? Tessa's voice was surprised but sharp. Everything okay? No, I said, staring at the $5 million shackle on my screen. I need you to look at something, and I need you to tell me if I'm crazy, or if my in-laws just declared war on me. Send it over, she said without missing a beat. I was not just a variable to be managed anymore. I was a target, and if they wanted a war over signatures and clauses, they were about to learn that Madeline Rios read the fine print. The silence in my townhouse had changed. It used to be a comforting silence, the kind that wraps around you after a 10-hour shift of managing freight logistics and putting out fires. Now, the silence felt heavy, watchful. It felt like the air inside a glass jar just before the lid is screwed tight. I started noticing the glitches in my reality 2 days after the brunch. It began with something mundane, a maintenance email. I was sitting at my kitchen island, nursing a lukewarm coffee before heading to the office, when a notification popped up on my phone from our building management portal. Ticket updated. Unit 4B HVAC filter replacement and inspection. Status, rescheduled. New time, Friday, October 14th, 10:03 a.m. I frowned. I had specifically scheduled that appointment for Saturday morning because I wanted to be home when the technicians were there. I did not like strangers in my house when I was not present. Friday at 10 in the morning? I would be in the middle of a weekly operations review. I called the building manager immediately. Hey, it is Madeline in 4B, I said, keeping my voice light. I got a notification that my maintenance was moved to Friday. I did not request that. Oh, good morning, Mrs. Hale? The manager, a young guy named Kevin, who always looked a bit overwhelmed, replied, Yeah, we got a call yesterday to switch it. The note here says it was to accommodate a family visit. Who called, Kevin? Let me check the log. There was a pause, the sound of typing. It says Mr. Hale. He said Saturday did not work anymore. I stared at the fruit bowl on the counter. Graham? Graham did not know the difference between a filter and a fuse box. He had never scheduled a maintenance appointment in the 4 years we had lived here. He considered house maintenance to be a magical phenomenon that happened automatically. Okay, I said, my blood running cold. Thanks, Kevin. Leave it for Friday. I hung up. I did not call Graham to ask him. If Graham had called, he would have mentioned it, or maybe he would not have. But Graham's voice was soft, hesitant. Douglas Hale's voice was booming and authoritative. If a man calling himself Mr. Hale called the front desk, Kevin would jump. Why would they want the maintenance crew there on Friday when I was gone? To verify the apartment was empty? Or to have an excuse for the door to be unlocked? I went upstairs to my home office. This was my sanctuary. I had a filing cabinet in the corner, a vintage steel one I had restored myself. It held our tax returns, our insurance policies, and my personal investment records, the ones Graham knew nothing about. I had a habit, a remnant of my early days in logistics where tamper-evident seals were part of the job. I always left the bottom drawer, the one with my private files, closed with the keyhole in a perfectly vertical position. 12 o'clock. I crouched down. The lock was turned to 1 o'clock. It was subtle. To anyone else, it would look locked. But someone had opened it and tried to return it to its original state, missing the alignment by a fraction of an inch. I unlocked it and pulled the drawer open. My folder labeled personal assets was there, but the papers inside were too neat. I was a messy filer. I shoved papers in. These were stacked, aligned by the corners. Someone had taken them out, read them, perhaps photographed them, and put them back with military precision. They were looking for leverage. They wanted to see if I had debt they could use to shame me, or assets they could try to claim were marital property. I felt a wave of nausea, followed immediately by a surge of cold, sharp anger. This was not just overbearing parenting, this was espionage. I left for work, my mind racing. I needed to get out of the house to think. I merged onto the highway, heading toward the industrial district. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was Cynthia. Cynthia. Good morning. Darling, drive carefully. I see there is a stalled truck on the I-77 exit ramp. You might want to take the side streets to the warehouse. I slammed on the brakes, causing the car behind me to honk aggressively. I pulled onto the shoulder, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had not told anyone I was going to the warehouse today. Usually, on Tuesdays. I went to the corporate office downtown. The warehouse was in the opposite direction. How did she know I was on I-77? And how did she know exactly where I was in relation to a traffic jam that had barely been reported on the radio? I looked down at my wrist, the platinum bracelet with the sleek digital face, a birthday gift from Cynthia 6 months ago. It is a health tracker. Madeline, she had said, clasping it onto my wrist with her ice-cold fingers. It tracks your stress levels. We just want you to be healthy for when you, well, for the future. I had thought it was a passive-aggressive comment about my weight or my fertility. I had never considered it was a homing beacon. I ripped the bracelet off my wrist. I navigated through the menus on the tiny screen. Settings, connectivity, sharing. There it was. Family Circle, Administrator, Cynthia Hale. She was tracking my heart rate, my sleep patterns, and my GPS coordinates in real time. She knew when I was sleeping. She knew when my heart rate spiked. She knew when I was at the lawyer's office. I opened my window and stared at the device. I wanted to hurl it into the drainage ditch, but that would be a signal. If the dot on her screen disappeared, she would know I knew. I placed the bracelet in the center console and covered it with an empty coffee cup, as if shielding it from view would stop the signal. I needed to be smarter than this. When I got to my office, I sat down and opened my laptop. I did not log into the company Wi-Fi. I tethered to a personal hotspot I kept for emergencies. I pulled up my phone account. Graham and I were on a family plan. It made sense financially, or so I had thought. The Hale Family Bundle, Douglas had called it. Unlimited data for everyone. I logged into the provider's website. I did not have the primary admin password, but I could see the permissions. My phone was listed as Device 4, and under the Privacy tab, the box for Location History was checked. The data was being backed up to a cloud account that I did not recognize. Hale Estate, admin at securemail.com. They had my texts. They had my call logs. They probably had a record of every website I had visited in the last 3 years. I felt violated in a way that made my skin crawl. I looked at the phone in my hand. It was not a communication tool. It was a wiretap. I needed a burner phone, and I needed it now. But first, I needed confirmation. I needed to know the extent of the physical breach. I called Nina. Nina was my best friend from college, a woman who worked in high-end real estate and knew every concierge and doorman in the city. She also happened to date the brother of the head of security for my building. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice low, speaking into my office landline. "I need a favor. Can you ask Jason to check the visitor logs for my building for the last 2 weeks, especially any time during the day when I was at work?" "Is everything okay?" Nina asked, her tone shifting from casual to alert instantly. "You sound like you are in a bunker." "I think my in-laws are breaking into my apartment," I said. "Just check, please." She called me back 20 minutes later. "Maddie," she said, and the drop in her voice confirmed my worst fears. "Last Tuesday, 11 in the morning, and again yesterday at 2. "Who was it?" "The log says Graham Hale's parents, the concierge, that new guy, let them up. He said they told him they were dropping off a surprise for your anniversary and had a key. Did you give them a key?" "No," I whispered. "I never gave them a key." "Then Graham did," Nina said. "Or they took one of his and copied it." I hung up the phone and stared at the wall. Graham. It was easy to blame Douglas and Cynthia. They were the villains of the piece, but Graham was the door they walked through. He was the one who added me to the phone plan. He was the one who likely gave them the spare key for emergencies. He was the one who sat there and let them hand me a waiver that stripped me of my dignity. He wasn't malicious. He was just weak, and in the world of the Hales, weakness was a weapon they used against you. I opened my desk drawer and took out a fresh notebook, a black, hardcover journal. I grabbed a pen. October 12th. Incident 1. HVAC appointment rescheduled by Mr. Hale without my consent. Incident 2. Personal filing cabinet accessed. Financial records disturbed. Incident 3. Unauthorized location tracking via gift bracelet. Incident 4. Location sharing enabled on personal phone without consent. Incident 5. Confirmed unauthorized entry into residence by Cynthia and Douglas Hale on 2 separate occasions. I wrote it all down, every detail, every timestamp. I looked at the bracelet sitting on my desk. I could not destroy it yet. I had to feed them false data. I opened my bag and took out the spare battery pack I carried for travel. I plugged the bracelet into it and tossed it into the back of my bottom desk drawer at work. Let Cynthia think I was spending 24 hours a day at the office. Let her wonder why my heart rate was perfectly flat. Then, I took my phone. I went into the settings and disabled the location sharing. I knew this would trigger an alert on their end. Let it. I would tell Graham my battery was dying too fast, and I turned off background apps. It was a flimsy lie, but it would buy me time. I spent the next hour changing passwords, my bank, my email, my investment accounts. I used a random password generator and wrote them down in the black notebook. Nothing digital, nothing they could keylog. I was not going to confront them, not yet. If I screamed at Graham tonight, he would panic. He would call his mother. She would know I was onto them, and they would scrub the evidence. They would claim I was paranoid, hysterical. They would say they were just checking on the dog, or dropping off soup, or that the tracking was an accident. I needed to know exactly what they found in my file cabinet. They saw my old employment contract, sure, but did they see the other folder? The one I had taped to the underside of the drawer itself? The one that held the deed to the rental property I bought 3 years ago under my maiden name? I reached into my memory of the morning. The drawer felt different, but the tape underneath? I would have to check when I got home. If they knew about my assets, the waiver made even more sense. They were not just protecting Graham's $5 million. They were trying to ensure that if we divorced, they could claim my assets were commingled while keeping his separate. I closed the notebook and slid it into my purse. I would never leave this book unattended again. Tonight, I would go home. I would kiss Graham on the cheek. I would eat the dinner he ordered. I would smile, and I would watch them. I would watch them watching me. I was Madeline Rios. I managed risk for a living, and I had just identified the biggest threat to my existence. I picked up the landline again and dialed Tessa's number. "Tessa," I said when she answered, "do not email me anything else, not to my current address. I'm making a new one, and I need the name of a private investigator, someone who specializes in digital forensics." "That bad?" Tessa asked. "Worse," I said, looking at the silent, blinking light of the bracelet in my drawer. "They are not just in-laws. Tessa, they are the opposition." Tessa Ward's office was on the 42nd floor of a glass tower that looked down on the city of Charlotte like a silent judge. The interior was a study in intimidation, chrome, black leather, and a view that cost more than my annual salary. I sat in a chair that was designed to be uncomfortable for anyone who was not paying the bill. My hands folded over the manila folder containing the printed email and the physical waiver. Tessa walked in 2 minutes late. She did not apologize. She was wearing a suit that was tailored so sharply it looked like it could cut glass. We had not seen each other in 5 years. But she skipped the pleasantries. She sat down, put on a pair of reading glasses, and held out her hand. "Let me see it," she said. I handed her the document. The room was silent for 10 minutes. Save for the rhythmic turning of heavy paper, I watched her face. Tessa had a poker face that could bankrupt a casino, but I saw a flicker of something around the corners of her mouth when she reached page 5. It was not a smile. It was a sneer. "This is impressive," she said finally, tossing the document onto her desk. "In the same way a car crash is impressive." "Is it standard?" I asked. Cynthia said it was just a formality. "Madeline, this document is a greatest hits collection of marital rights violations," Tessa said, leaning back. "They are not just asking you to waive your claim to the trust. Look at Article 4. You are waiving your right to financial discovery in the event of a divorce. Do you know what that means?" "It means I cannot ask how much money he has," I said. "It means he could be hiding $50 million in a Cayman account, and you would be legally barred from even asking a judge to look for it," she corrected. "And here, Article 7, it stipulates that any income generated from the trust that is used for joint marital expenses, like, say, buying a house or paying for a vacation, does not convert that asset into marital property. Usually, commingling funds makes them shared. This attempts to bypass state law entirely." "Can they do that?" "They can try," Tessa said. "If you sign it, you are handing them a loaded gun. But that is not the interesting part." She pulled the printout of the email toward her. "The one demanding I sign within 24 hours. She frowned, tapping her pen against the paper. "Who sent this?" she asked. "The email says Hale Family Legal," I replied. "It came from a DocuSign notification." Tessa turned her monitor so I could see it. She began typing rapidly. "I know the firm Douglas uses. It is usually Sterling and Cooper. This email address, legal@halatrustmanagement.com, is not them." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I am running a domain search right now," she said, her eyes scanning the screen. "Here we go. The domain halatrustmanagement.com was registered 3 days ago. It is hosted on a private server. It is not a law firm. Madeline, it is a shell." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "So a lawyer did not send this?" "No," Tessa said, her voice dropping to a clinically cold register. "Douglas or his assistant probably set this up. They drafted this document, likely copying and pasting from old templates, and sent it to you through a legitimate-looking email address to scare you. A real lawyer would never put a 24-hour deadline on a document of this magnitude without prior counsel review. It is unethical. It borders on duress." "They are trying to panic me," I realized. "They are trying to bypass due process," Tessa said. "If this went to court, I could argue you signed under coercion, but we do not want to go to court, not yet." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the skyline. "Here is the reality. Madeline, they do not trust you. That is clear. But this document tells me something else. They are afraid of you." "Afraid of me? I am nobody to them. I am a logistics manager." "You are the uncontrolled variable," she turned back to me. "This document is sloppy. It is aggressive. It screams desperation. People with nothing to hide do not create fake email domains to pressure their daughters-in-law. They are trying to lock you out of the financials before you get a chance to look inside." I thought about the filing cabinet in my house, the way the lock had been picked, the tracking on my phone. It was all part of the same picture. They were fortifying their walls because they knew there was rot in the foundation. "So what do?" I asked. "Do I refuse to sign?" "If you refuse outright, they will cut you off," Tessa said. "Douglas will likely threaten to disinherit Graham. Graham will blame you. The marriage implodes. You leave with nothing but your pride." "I do not want their money, Tessa." "It is not about wanting their money," she snapped. "It is about protection. If you sign this, and Graham divorces you in 5 years, you walk away with 0 assets. Even if you contributed to the household the entire time, they could leave you destitute." She sat back down and opened a fresh legal pad. "We are going to play their game, but we are going to play by actual rules. We are not going to sign. We are going to negotiate. And we are going to ask for a reciprocating agreement." "A what?" "A post-nuptial agreement goes both ways," Tessa explained. "If they want you to waive your rights to his trust, fine. But we are going to demand that Graham, and by extension, the Hale estate, waives any claim to your assets. We are going to demand full financial disclosure from both sides before any signature happens. We are going to require an independent audit of the trust to verify its value. Douglas will never agree to an audit, I said. Exactly, Tessa smiled, a razor-sharp expression. That is how we stall. We ask for things they cannot give us without exposing whatever it is they are hiding. We buy time, and while we buy time, you gather evidence, the tracking, the fake email, the breaking and entering. We build a dossier. If they try to destroy you, we nuke them with harassment and fraud lawsuits. She paused, her pen hovering over the paper. She looked at me with a sudden intensity. But before we start this fire, Madeline, I need to know the battlefield. I know what Graham has, or what he thinks he has. I need to know what you have. I hesitated. I had never said it out loud to anyone. Not to Graham, not to my parents. It was my safety net, spun from years of obsession and luck. I have assets, I said quietly. Define assets, Tessa said. A savings account? A 401k? When I was 25, I worked for a tech startup in Austin. I began. I was part of the operations team. I took a lower salary in exchange for equity. I thought the stock was worthless paper. Then they were acquired by a major conglomerate 3 years ago. Tessa's eyebrows lifted slightly. And I cashed out part of it, but I kept the rest reinvested, I said. I also bought 2 commercial properties in Raleigh under an LLC. My maiden name is on the incorporation papers. But the LLC manages everything. The rent goes into a separate account. How much are we talking about, Madeline? Total net worth. I took a breath. Liquid and assets combined? About $1.8 million? Tessa sat back in her chair, and for the first time, she looked genuinely delighted. She let out a short, sharp laugh. Does Graham know? She asked. No, I said. I wanted us to build a life together. I did not want him to feel, I do not know, emasculated. And then, when I met his parents, I realized that if they knew I had money, they would try to control it, so I kept it separate. I use my salary for our bills. The investment income just compounds. 1.8 million, Tessa repeated, savoring the number. Madeline, you are not the poor little match girl they think you are. You are a player. I just wanted to be a wife, I said, feeling the sadness wash over me again. Well, now you get to be a shark, Tessa said. She started writing furiously on her pad. This changes everything. If you have independent wealth, the narrative that you are a gold digger falls apart instantly. In fact, if we structure this right, we can argue that you are the one who needs protection from them. She looked up at me, her eyes gleaming. Here is the plan. We are going to draft a response. We are not going to mention the fake email yet. We are going to treat it as a legitimate offer that simply needs refinement. We are going to send back a redlined version of their waiver. We will demand a mutuality clause. We will state that since you are waiving rights to Graham's $5 million trust, Graham must waive all rights to your independent estate, value undisclosed. Value undisclosed? Let them wonder, Tessa said. It will drive Douglas insane. He will assume you have $10,000 in a checking account. When we finally reveal the truth, it will be in a room full of people, on our terms. What about the deadline? I asked. The email said 5 o'clock tomorrow. I will handle the deadline, Tessa said. I will send a letter of representation to Douglas's actual lawyers, Sterling and Cooper. I will tell them I am reviewing the document. Once lawyers are involved, the 24-hour clock vanishes. They cannot force you to sign without counsel. It would invalidate the whole agreement in court. She tore the sheet off her legal pad and handed it to me. It was a list of instructions. 1. Do not sign anything. 2. Do not discuss the trust with Graham. Tell him, it is with my lawyer. 3. Secure all documents related to your LLC and investments. Get them out of your house. 4. Keep the tracker active but useless. 5. Record every conversation with Douglas or Cynthia from this point forward. North Carolina is a one-party consent state. One-party consent? I asked. It means as long as you are part of the conversation, you can record it without telling them. Tessa said, get a voice recorder, a good one. Tape it to your body if you have to. The next time you are in a room with them, I want every threat, every sneer, every demand on tape. I took the paper. My hands were steady now. The fear that had been gripping my throat since the brunch was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I was not just fighting for my marriage anymore. In fact, I was starting to realize the marriage might already be a casualty. I was fighting for my survival. One more thing, Tessa said as I stood up to leave. The email signature, the one from the fake legal team, it lists an address. I looked at the printout, 1400 Highland Avenue, Suite 300. I know that building, Tessa said. It is a co-working space. You can rent a mailbox there for $50 a month. If you want to know who really sent that email, go see who pays for box 300. I will, I said. Be careful, Madeline, Tessa warned, her voice softening just a fraction. When narcissists lose control, they do not just get angry, they get dangerous. Do not let them know you have teeth until you are ready to bite. I walked out of the glass tower and into the bright, blinding sunlight of downtown Charlotte. I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Graham, 2 text messages from Cynthia. Cynthia, did you get the email? Dear, please confirm receipt. I did not reply. Instead, I walked to my car, got in, and drove toward Highland Avenue. I had a mailbox to check. And for the first time in my life, I felt like the person Douglas Hale feared most. I was not a problem to be solved. I was a catastrophe waiting to happen. It is a strange sensation to sit across the dinner table from your husband, watching him worry about a mortgage payment, while knowing you could pay off the entire principal with a wire transfer from an account he does not know exists. For years, the Hales had looked at me and seen a project, a charity case. To them, my off-the-rack blazers and my driving of a 5-year-old sedan were evidence of struggle. They did not understand that for me, they were evidence of strategy. I was not poor. I was simply uninterested in performing wealth. My financial history was the one room in the house of my life that I had kept locked, even from Graham, especially from Graham. 7 years ago, before I joined Marrowline Logistics, I worked for a mid-sized tech firm in Austin. I was young, ambitious, and unfortunately for them, observant. I uncovered a pattern of billing fraud that went all the way up to the regional director. When I reported it, they tried to fire me for performance issues. I did not go quietly. I hired a lawyer, not Tessa, but someone just as vicious, and I walked away with a settlement that came with a very strict non-disclosure agreement and a check for $350,000. I did not buy a sports car. I did not go to Europe. I put every cent of it into a high-yield, aggressive growth portfolio and a couple of grim, unlovable commercial properties in Raleigh that generated steady, quiet rent over 7 years. Thanks to the miracle of compound interest and a booming real estate market, that seed money had grown into the $1.8 million I had disclosed to Tessa. I had never told Graham because, in the beginning, I wanted us to be equals. I knew that if I came into the marriage waving a checkbook, the dynamic would shift. Graham had a complex about his family's money. He hated it, yet he was dependent on it. If he knew I was independent, I feared he would feel unnecessary. I wanted him to be my husband, not my dependent, and certainly not my financial rival. But now, that silence felt less like a romantic gesture and more like a tactical advantage. The Hales believed I was desperate. They believed that without Graham, I would be back in a rental apartment eating instant noodles. That assumption was their blind spot. They were so busy guarding their $5 million fortress from the barbarian at the gate that they did not realize the barbarian had brought her own siege engine. 2 days after my meeting with Tessa, Cynthia made her move regarding the bank accounts. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk at Marrowline, cross-referencing shipping manifests, when my personal phone buzzed. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. Madeline, it is Cynthia. I was just speaking with our banker at Chase. He mentioned that setting up a joint checking account now would really streamline things once the trust activates. It shows good faith. I have gone ahead and had the paperwork drawn up. I can have the courier bring it to your office. It just needs a signature. Call me. I deleted the message and stared at the wall. A joint account. It was the oldest trick in the financial abuse handbook. Once my paycheck went into a pot they could see. They could critique every coffee, every gas station fill-up, every doctor's copay. It was financial voyeurism disguised as family unity. I called her back. I made sure my voice sounded tired, slightly defeated. I needed them to think the pressure was working. "Hi, Cynthia," I said. "I got your message." "Oh, good," she chirped. "I can send the courier over within the hour." "Actually, I need a few days," I lied smoothly. "I have some automatic payments set up on my current account, student loans, car insurance, and I need to migrate them carefully so I do not get hit with overdraft fees. You know how tight things are for me right now." I could practically hear her smirk through the phone. She loved hearing that things were tight. It confirmed her worldview. "Of course, dear," she purred. "Take your time, but let us try to get it done before the weekend. Douglas likes to have things tidy." "I will do my best," I said. "By the way, did Graham mention if he's coming home for dinner? He has not answered my texts." "Oh, he's dining with us tonight," she said, dropping the information casually. "We are discussing the estate planning. I assumed he told you." "Must have slipped his mind," I said. "Well, you know how Graham is," she said dismissively. "He gets so overwhelmed. We are just helping him carry the load." I hung up. They were isolating him. They were filling his head with fear, likely telling him that my hesitation to sign the waiver was proof that I was planning a divorce. They were projecting their own greed onto me. I left the office early. I did not go home. I went to a coffee shop on Highland Avenue, directly across the street from the building Tessa had identified. I sat by the window with a cold brew, watching the entrance of number 1400. It was a nondescript brick building, the kind that houses dental practices and tax preparers. Suite 300 was a virtual office service. I knew because I had looked it up. I was waiting for Nina. She walked in 10 minutes later, looking effortlessly glamorous in a trench coat and sunglasses, holding a large envelope. Nina was not just a real estate agent. She was a woman who knew how to find out who owned what and who was sleeping in it. "You look like a spy," she said, sliding into the booth opposite me. "I feel like one," I replied. "Did you find out who pays for the mailbox?" Nina tapped the envelope. "It was not easy. The virtual office place has a strict privacy policy, but, luckily, they are currently leasing a retail space in one of my buildings downtown, and the manager owes me a favor for waiving a late fee last month." She opened the envelope and slid a photocopy of a rental agreement across the table. "The box for Hale Trust Management was rented 3 months ago," Nina said. "Payment is made via a corporate credit card." I looked at the name on the credit card authorization form. Patricia Vane. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. "Patricia." "Who is she?" Nina asked. "She is Douglas's executive assistant," I said. "She has been with him for 20 years. She buys his wife's birthday presents. She schedules his colonoscopies. She is the gatekeeper." "Well, the gatekeeper is sloppy," Nina said. She used her work email to register the account, pvane@haleindustries.com. I stared at the paper. This was the smoking gun. A lawyer had not sent that threat. A paralegal had not sent it. Douglas had ordered his secretary to rent a mailbox, register a fake domain, and threaten his daughter-in-law with a 24-hour deadline. It was fraud. It was harassment. And because they used the internet to transmit it, it was arguably wire fraud. "He got his secretary to do his dirty work," I said, shaking my head. "He did not even respect me enough to hire a professional hitman." "What are you going to do?" Nina asked, taking a sip of my coffee. "You can take this to the police." "No," I said. "The police will say it is a civil matter, and if I show this to Graham, he will just make excuses. He will say Patricia made a mistake, or that his dad didn't know." "So what then?" "I am going to let them think they have won. I said. I am going to let them think I am broken. I am going to let them think I am poor, scared, and ready to sign whatever they put in front of me. I looked out the window at the building. I imagined Patricia sitting in her cubicle, following orders, thinking she was just helping Douglas protect the family silver. She had no idea she had just handed me the match to burn the whole house down. There is a family meeting this weekend, I said, my mind racing. Graham mentioned it. They want to do a final review of the trust documents before his birthday. Are you going? Oh, I am going, I said, and I am bringing a guest. Tessa? No, I said. Tessa is for the courtroom. I am bringing something else. I reached into my bag and pulled out the black notebook. I turned to the page where I had written down my assets, the $1.8 million, the properties, the clean, unblemished financial record of a woman who knew how to save. I am going to bring the truth, I said, but not the truth they are expecting. I looked at Nina. I need one more favor. I need you to run a title search on the Hale family estate, the big house on Providence Road. Why? Nina asked. Because Douglas keeps talking about how important it is to keep assets in the family, I said. But when I looked at the trust document, the waiver mentioned that the trust was subject to existing liens. $5 million shouldn't have liens unless it is being used as collateral for something else. Nina's eyes widened. You think they are leveraged? I think Douglas Hale talks a lot about money for a man who sends fake legal threats to save $5,000 on a lawyer. I said, I think the emperor might not be naked, but he is definitely wearing rented clothes. I will check it tonight, Nina promised. I drove home feeling a strange sense of calm. The fear was gone. The hurt was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard logistics of the situation. They wanted a transaction. I would give them one. When I walked into the house, Graham was home. He was sitting on the couch, watching sports, a beer in his hand. He looked up, his face tight. Mom said you are delaying the joint account, he said. No hello. No how was your day? I am just organizing my bills. Graham, I said, walking past him to the kitchen. I want to be responsible. She thinks you are hiding something, he said. I stopped. I turned to look at him. Hiding something? Like what? A drug habit? A second family? I do not know, Maddie, he said, standing up. She says you are being secretive, and this whole thing with the waiver. Why can't you just sign it? Why do you have to make it a war? I am not the one who declared war, Graham, I said softly. You are the one refusing to surrender, he countered. I looked at him, really looked at him. He was not a bad man, but he was a weak one, and in that moment, I realized that I could not save him. I could only save myself. I will sign, I lied. I just need to read it one more time. We can do it at the family meeting on Saturday, okay? Graham slumped, the tension leaving his shoulders. Okay, good. That is good, Maddie. They just want what is best for us. I know, I said. I know exactly what they want. I went upstairs to the spare room, opened the closet, and pulled out my file box. I took out the folder marked Hale Trust. Then I took out the folder marked Madeline Rios, Personal Equity. I placed them side by side on the bed. One was a lie wrapped in legalese. The other was freedom. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Tessa. Madeline, green light, prepare the counteroffer. We are doing this live on Saturday. Then I sent a text to Nina. Madeline, dig deep. I want to know every mortgage, every loan, every second lien on Douglas Hale's name. I was done playing the victim. It was time to show them what a real operator looked like. The Founders Club was the kind of place where the silence cost money. It was a cavernous space of dark mahogany, hunter green velvet, and portraits of dead men who had owned railroads. The air was kept at a crisp 68 degrees, smelling faintly of lemon polish and aged bourbon. We were seated in the Jefferson Room, a private conference suite with a view of the manicured lawn. Douglas sat at the head of the table, naturally. Cynthia was to his right, her hands clasped on the polished wood. Graham sat across from her, looking like a truant schoolboy awaiting punishment. And then there was Mr. Sterling. I had expected Douglas to bring his usual bluster, but the presence of Arthur Sterling, a senior partner at one of the city's most prestigious law firms, shifted the gravity of the room. Sterling was a man of few words and expensive suits. He had the tired, efficient look of someone who billed $800 an hour. I took my seat at the opposite end of the table from Douglas. I placed my bag on the floor and my phone on the table. Screen down. I had already activated the voice recorder app in the parking lot. "Let us get started," Douglas said, not wasting time on pleasantries. "We have the notary waiting outside. This should not take long." He slid the familiar cream-colored folder toward me across the long table. It stopped perfectly within my reach. "The terms remain as discussed," Douglas continued, his voice booming slightly in the acoustic perfection of the room. "Full waiver of spousal interest in the Hale Family Trust. It protects the principal. It protects the lineage. Simple." I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I opened my own portfolio, a slim, black leather binder. "I have read the document, Douglas," I said, keeping my voice even, "and I am prepared to move forward, provided we clarify a few procedural errors." Douglas frowned. "Procedural errors? It is a standard waiver." I looked at Mr. Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, it is a pleasure to meet you. I assume you drafted this agreement?" Sterling nodded, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "I did, Mrs. Hale. It is a boilerplate protection regarding premarital assets held in trust." "And did you also send the electronic copy via DocuSign on Tuesday?" I asked. Sterling looked confused. He glanced at Douglas, then back at me. "My office does not use DocuSign for sensitive family instruments, Mrs. Hale. We prefer wet signatures, and we certainly would not send a final draft without a consultation." "That is interesting," I said. I pulled the printed email from my binder and slid it toward the lawyer. "Because this email, sent from a Hale legal team, demanded I sign within 24 hours or risk blocking the disbursement. It stated that your firm required it." Sterling picked up the paper. He read it, his expression shifting from boredom to professional annoyance. "This did not come from my firm," Sterling said, his voice dropping. "The domain name is incorrect, and we would never impose a 24-hour deadline on a $5 million waiver. That constitutes duress. If you signed under this threat, a judge could toss the whole thing out in 10 minutes. The silence in the room was sudden and absolute. Graham looked up, his eyes darting between the lawyer and his father. "Dad?" Graham asked. "You told me Sterling needed it done by Wednesday." Douglas's face turned a shade of red that clashed with the green walls. He snatched the paper from Sterling's hand. "It was a clerical error," Douglas snapped. "My assistant, Patricia, was trying to be helpful. She knows we are on a timeline for Graham's birthday. She must have set up a reminder and worded it poorly." "She created a fake domain name to be helpful?" I asked. HaleTrustManagement.com? That seems like a lot of effort for a secretary. "We are not here to discuss IT issues," Douglas barked, crumbling the paper in his fist. "We are here to sign the waiver. The deadline is irrelevant now, because we are all here. The money vests in 2 weeks. Do you want to be the reason your husband loses his inheritance, Madeline?" "No," I said. "I do not." "Then sign the damn paper," Douglas said. "I will," I said. "As soon as we add an addendum." Cynthia spoke up for the first time, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "An addendum? Madeline, this is not a negotiation. It is a gift we are giving Graham. You have no right to make demands." "Actually, Cynthia, a post-nuptial agreement is a contract," I corrected her. "And contracts require consideration and mutual consent. I am willing to waive my rights to Graham's trust, but in the interest of fairness, and to ensure this document stands up in court so it cannot be challenged later, I require a reciprocal clause." I pulled a second document from my binder. Tessa had drafted it the night before. It was short, brutal, and perfect. "This is a reciprocal asset waiver," I explained, sliding copies to Sterling and Graham. "It states that just as I waive all claims to Graham's separate property, Graham waives all claims to mine. It also states that neither party can access the other's financial records without a court order. Douglas let out a short, incredulous laugh. It was a harsh sound. Your property? Madeline, be serious. We are talking about $5 million here. You are trying to protect what? Your checking account? Your used car? It is a matter of principle, Douglas, I said. If the goal is to keep finances separate, then let us keep them completely separate. If I have nothing, then Graham signing this costs him nothing. It should be an easy yes. It is a waste of ink, Douglas sneered. It is petty. You are just trying to be difficult because you feel slighted. I am trying to be protected, I said, just like you. Protected from what? Douglas slammed his hand on the table. My son is not going to steal your… whatever it is you have. This is insulting. We are trying to secure a generational legacy, and you are playing games with legal clauses you probably do not even understand. I understand them perfectly, I said. And Mr. Sterling understands them too. Mr. Sterling, is there any legal reason why a reciprocal waiver would be objectionable? If one party has significant assets and the other has negligible assets, as Douglas suggests, does signing a mutual waiver harm the wealthy party? Sterling looked at Douglas, then at me. He was a lawyer, and despite who paid his bill, he respected the game. Technically, no, Sterling said slowly. In fact, adding a mutuality clause often makes the agreement stronger in court. It shows that both parties entered into it on equal footing. It removes the appearance of unconscionability. See? I looked at Graham. It makes the trust safer. Graham, if we both sign away our rights to each other's money, there is no confusion, no fighting. Graham was reading the document I had provided. He looked up at his father. Dad, she is right. If she does not have anything, why do I care if I sign this? It just gets it over with. Because I do not take orders from her, Douglas shouted. The mask slipped. The cool, calculated patriarch vanished, replaced by a red-faced bully. This is not about fairness, Douglas yelled, pointing a finger at me. This is about compliance. You come into my family, you live in the house I bought, you eat the food I pay for, and you dare to dictate terms? You are nothing in this equation. Madeline, you are a placeholder, and you will sign exactly what I tell you to sign, or I will make sure Graham walks away from this table without a dime. The room went dead silent. Cynthia reached out and touched Douglas's arm. Douglas, calm down. Your blood pressure. But the damage was done. Douglas had said the quiet part out loud. He had admitted that the money was a leash, not a gift. I looked at Graham. He was staring at his father with a look of pure shock. He had always known his father was controlling, but he had never heard him threaten to disinherit him over a signature. You would cut me off? Graham asked quietly. Because Maddie wants a mutual waiver? You would take the trust away? It is my money, Graham, Douglas spat. I made it. I control it. And until you show me you can control your wife, you do not deserve it. I am not a dog to be controlled, Douglas, I said, my voice cutting through the heat like a blade. And Graham is not a child. He acts like one, Douglas roared. Letting you drag this out. If you had any respect for this family, you would have signed the day we gave it to you. Like you respected me when you had your assistant forge a legal deadline? I asked. Douglas glared at me with pure hatred. You have no proof of that. Actually, I said, tapping my phone, I have the domain registry logs, and I have the credit card receipt from the mailbox rental on Highland Avenue, paid for by Patricia Vane. I saw Cynthia's eyes widen. She looked at Douglas. She knew. She had known the whole time. You tracked Patricia? Douglas hissed. I protected myself, I said, just like you taught me. I turned to Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling, I am prepared to sign the waiver regarding the Hale Trust. However, I will only do so if the reciprocal asset waiver is attached and signed by Graham and notarized today. If Douglas refuses to allow Graham to sign a document that costs him absolutely nothing, then we have to ask ourselves, Why does Douglas Hale want access to my financial future so badly? I let the question hang there. It was a nonsensical question to them. They thought I was poor, but it forced them into a corner. If they refused, they looked irrationally controlling. If they agreed, they unknowingly signed away their claim to my $1.8 million. Douglas was breathing heavily. He looked at Sterling. "Tell her she has to sign the original," Douglas demanded. "I cannot do that." "Douglas," Sterling said, closing his folder, "she has made a reasonable counteroffer. If you threaten to withhold the trust to force a signature on a one-sided agreement, that is coercion. If I witness that, I cannot ethically let the signing proceed. It would be malpractice." Douglas looked like he wanted to flip the heavy mahogany table. He looked at Graham, expecting his son to fold, to beg, to plead with me to just give in. But Graham was looking at the fake email printout again. He was looking at the father who had lied to him about the lawyer, lied to him about the deadline, and just threatened to ruin him financially because he couldn't control his wife. "Let her sign the addendum, Dad," Graham said. His voice was shaking, but he said it. "Excuse me?" Douglas whispered. "It does not matter," Graham said, looking up. "I do not want her money. I never have. If signing this makes her feel safe, let's just do it. I just want this over with." "You are a fool," Douglas snarled. "You are letting her lead you by the nose." "I am asking you to stop yelling," Graham said. "Please." Douglas looked around the room. He saw Sterling watching him with professional detachment. He saw Cynthia looking anxious. He saw me, unmoving. He realized he had lost the room. He could not bully his way out of this one without blowing up the entire trust transfer, which he clearly needed to happen for reasons I still had not fully uncovered. "Fine," Douglas spat. "Sign it, both of you. But do not think I will forget this. Madeline." "I am counting on that, Douglas," I said. "Mr. Sterling pulled a fresh copy of the reciprocal waiver from the stack I had provided. He reviewed it quickly, nodded, and slid it to Graham. Graham signed it without reading it. He passed it to me. I signed it. Then, I pulled the Hale Trust waiver toward me. I signed that too. I had just given up any claim to $5 million, but I had gained something far more valuable. I had just legally firewalled my own fortune from the Hale family forever, and I had the first crack in the foundation of Graham's loyalty to his father. "Notarize it," Douglas barked at the woman waiting by the door. As the notary stamped the pages, the sound echoed like gunshots in the quiet room. Bam, bam, bam. I capped my pen. I looked at Douglas. He was staring at me with a look that promised retribution. He thought he had won the war because he kept his money. He didn't realize he had just lost the most important battle. "Thank you for the brunch," I said, standing up. Though I seemed to have lost my appetite, I walked out of the Jefferson room, my recording app still running. I had the audio of Douglas admitting the trust was a tool for control. I had the signed waiver protecting my assets. And as I walked down the plush hallway, I heard Graham's voice behind me. "Maddie, wait." I stopped. I didn't turn around immediately. I let him come to me. He didn't mean that," Graham stammered when he caught up. "About cutting me off." I turned. I looked at my husband, really seeing the fear in his eyes. "Yes, Graham," I said softly. "He did, and the only reason he didn't do it is because he needs that trust to activate just as much as you do, maybe even more." "What do you mean?" "I mean, rich men don't create fake email domains to rush a signature unless they are desperate," I said. "Ask yourself, Graham, why is the timeline so tight? Why is he so afraid of a delay?" I left him standing there in the hallway of the Founders Club, the seed of doubt planted deep in his mind. I walked out to my car, got in, and finally exhaled. Phase 1 was complete. I was legally untouchable. Now, it was time for Phase 2, finding out why Douglas Hale was so terrified of anyone looking closely at his money. The ink on the notary's stamp was barely dry when the atmosphere in the Jefferson room shifted from tense to toxic. Douglas was gathering the papers with a triumphant snap of his wrist. Clearly believing he had successfully corralled the threat, he had his waiver. He believed my access to the Hale fortune was now severed. "Well," Douglas said, checking his watch. "That is settled. Graham, we will see you at dinner on Sunday. Madeline, I assume you have work to get back to." It was a dismissal. He was treating me like the hired help who had just finished scrubbing the floors. "Actually, Douglas," I said, remaining seated, "we are not quite done. Since we are all here, and since Mr. Sterling is billing by the hour, I think this is the perfect time to review the current health of the trust I just agreed not to touch." Douglas froze. "The trust is fine. It is managed by professionals." "I am sure it is," I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out the platinum bracelet Cynthia had given me. I held it up, letting the diamond chip on the face catch the light, just like my health was managed by professionals. I tossed the bracelet onto the mahogany table. It slid across the polished surface with a harsh scrape, stopping inches from Cynthia's water glass. "I found the tracking chip. Cynthia," I said, "and the data logs. You have been monitoring my location for 6 months. You knew when I went to the doctor. You knew when I went to the lawyer. You even knew when I stopped for coffee." Graham looked at the bracelet, then at his mother. His face was pale. "Mom, is that true?" Cynthia's hand flew to her chest, a gesture of theatrical shock that she had perfected over decades. "Oh, Graham, do not look at me like that. It was for her safety. Charlotte can be dangerous at night. I just wanted to make sure she was okay. I was worrying myself sick." "You were stalking me," I corrected her. "And you used the family data plan to mirror my phone. That is not love, Cynthia. That is surveillance." "You are being hysterical," Douglas snapped. "My wife cares about this family. If you had nothing to hide, you would not care who knew where you were." "I have plenty to hide now," I said. "Like the fact that I know about the email." I looked at Mr. Sterling. The lawyer was sitting very still, his eyes darting between his client and the bracelet. He was starting to realize that this was not a standard estate planning meeting. This was a liability in the making. "Mr. Sterling," I said. "Earlier, Douglas claimed his assistant, Patricia, sent that fake legal threat from HaleTrustManagement.com. He called it a clerical error." "That is correct," Sterling said cautiously. "Well," I continued, opening a new section of my binder, "I did a little digging into Hale Trust Management. It turns out it is not just a domain name for sending scary emails. It is also a registered LLC. And according to the financial summary attached to the back of the trust document, the one Graham just signed without reading, this entity has been billing the trust for consulting services for the last 5 years." I slid the financial report toward Graham. I pointed to a line item in the expenses column. "Management and advisory fees. Hale Trust Management, LLC." "Look at the number, Graham," I said. Graham squinted at the paper. $30,000, he read. "Quarterly. That is $120,000 a year," I said. "Paid to a company that consists of a mailbox on Highland Avenue, the same mailbox Patricia Vane rents with a corporate credit card." I looked at Douglas. The sweat on his forehead was no longer from the heat of the moment. It was the cold sweat of exposure. "Standard administrative costs," Douglas grunted, though his voice lacked its usual boom. "Wealth management is expensive. You wouldn't understand complex financial structures. Madeline, you manage trucks." "I manage margins, Douglas," I said sharply. "And I know that a 2% management fee is standard. You are paying nearly 10% of the trust's annual yield to a shell company that you control. You are not protecting Graham's money. You are siphoning it." Graham looked up from the paper. He looked like a man who had just been punched in the gut. "Dad, what is she talking about? Where is this money going?" "It goes back into the estate," Douglas yelled. "To maintain the house, to pay for the club, to keep up the lifestyle that you have enjoyed your entire life. Do you think this life is free? Do you think the membership to this club pays for itself?" "But this is my trust," Graham said, his voice rising. "Grandfather left this for me. You told me it was compounding. You told me it was untouched. It is an investment, Cynthia cried out, slamming her hand on the table. We invested in you. We paid for your college. We bought you that townhouse. We have supported you every step of the way. The townhouse is in the trust's name, I pointed out calmly. Graham does not own it. The trust owns it, and the trust pays rent. To whom? Douglas? I flipped another page. Ah, here it is. Hale Properties, LLC. Another shell. You are charging the trust market rate rent for the house your son lives in, and that money flows right back to you. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the sound of a carefully constructed reality shattering into pieces. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. He began to pack his briefcase. His movements were precise, hurried. Mr. Hale, Sterling said, his voice icy. You represented to my firm that this trust was unencumbered and managed by an independent fiduciary. If you are the beneficial owner of the management company billing the trust, that is a conflict of interest we were not made aware of. Sit down, Arthur, Douglas commanded. You are paid to represent me. I am paid to represent the legal interests of the estate, Sterling said, standing up, not to facilitate self-dealing. If these allegations are true, you have breached your fiduciary duty to the beneficiary. I cannot be a party to this. You walk out that door and you are fired, Douglas roared. I will send my final invoice on Monday, Sterling said. He looked at me, gave a curt nod, and walked out of the room. We were alone, the parents, the son, and the problem. You bitch, Cynthia hissed. It was the first time I had ever heard her use a word that wasn't dipped in sugar. Her face was twisted, her makeup settling into the deep lines of rage around her mouth. She wasn't the elegant matriarch anymore. She was desperate. You come into our lives, Cynthia spat, standing up and leaning over the table. You with your cheap shoes and your judgmental eyes? You think you are better than us? You think you can take our son and turn him against us? I did not turn him against you. Cynthia, I said. The math did. Numbers do not lie. You made me sign that waiver not because you were afraid I would take the money in a divorce. You were afraid I would audit the books during the marriage. You were afraid I would see that the $5 million is not $5 million anymore. I looked at Graham. Ask them, Graham. Ask them how much is actually liquid in that account right now. Graham stood up. He looked taller than I had ever seen him. He looked at his father. How much is left? Graham asked. Douglas refused to look at him. He stared at the wall, his jaw working furiously. Dad, Graham said, his voice breaking. How much? The market has been volatile, Douglas muttered. We had expenses. The roof on the estate. Your sister's wedding. How much? Graham screamed. About $2 million, Douglas shouted back. Maybe a little less, but it is tied up. It is illiquid. $2 million. They had burned through 60% of his inheritance to fund their own facade of wealth. They had been living off their son's future because they had likely squandered their own. You stole $3 million from me, Graham whispered. We raised you, Cynthia screamed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her mascara. We gave you everything, you ungrateful child. We have sacrifices you cannot even imagine. We did it for the family name, to keep us respectable. Do you want us to live in a condo? Do you want your father to drive a Toyota? I wanted you to be my parents, Graham said. Not thieves. Don't you use that word, Douglas warned, stepping toward Graham. I stood up and moved between them. I would be careful. Douglas, remember, North Carolina is a one-party consent state. I tapped my phone on the table. I have been recording since I walked into this room. I lied. I had been recording since the parking lot, but the distinction didn't matter. I have you on tape admitting to commingling funds, self-dealing, and effectively embezzling from a trust where you are the trustee. That is not just a lawsuit. Douglas, that is criminal fraud. Douglas stopped. He looked at the phone. He looked at me. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly gray. You wouldn't, he whispered. It would destroy Graham too, the scandal. I do not care about the scandal, I said. And frankly, Graham is already destroyed. You did that when you decided his trust fund was your personal piggy bank. Cynthia collapsed into her chair, sobbing into her hands. It was a loud, ugly sound. We are ruined. She has ruined us. You ruined yourselves, I said. I just turned on the lights. I picked up my binder. I picked up my phone. I looked at Graham. He was staring at his parents like they were strangers. Are you coming? I asked him. Graham looked at the waiver he had just signed, the one where he promised not to touch my money. He looked at the waiver I had signed, the one where I promised not to touch the trust that was half empty anyway. He realized then that I had saved him. If I hadn't pushed for this meeting, if I hadn't forced the issue, he would have signed papers blindly, accepted control of a hollowed-out trust, and been liable for their mismanagement. He took off his class ring, the one Douglas had bought him when he graduated, and placed it on the table next to the tracking bracelet. Yeah, Graham said, his voice hollow. I am coming. He walked to the door. He didn't look back at his mother sobbing or his father staring blankly at the wall. I followed him, but before I left, I turned to Douglas one last time. By the way, I said, I am not going to sue you, not yet, but from this moment on, the management of that trust is going to change, and if I see one more invoice from a mailbox company, I will send this recording to the district attorney. Enjoy your brunch. I closed the heavy oak door on the Jefferson room, sealing the toxicity inside. We walked out into the lobby of the club, past the portraits of the dead men. They seemed to be looking down at us with disapproval, or maybe it was envy. After all, we were the ones walking away with the truth. I expected a storm. I expected shouting matches, angry voicemails, perhaps a car pulling into my driveway at midnight with its headlights off. But I had underestimated the Hales. They did not fight like street brawlers. They fought like a virus. They infected the environment around you until you suffocated. The counterattack began 48 hours after the meeting at the Founders Club. It started not at home, but at work. When I walked into Marrowline Logistics on Tuesday morning, the air in the bullpen felt different. Usually, I was greeted with nods, the hum of phones, the frantic energy of the morning shift. Today, there was a sudden, sharp drop in volume the moment I swiped my badge. I went to the break room to get coffee. Two of the junior logistics coordinators were whispering by the sink. They stopped abruptly when I entered. One of them, a girl named Jessica who I had mentored for 6 months, looked down at her shoes, her face flushing a deep crimson. Good morning, I said, testing the waters. Morning, Madeline, she mumbled, grabbing her mug and practically running out of the room. I felt a prickle of unease on the back of my neck. I walked to my office, booted up my computer, and saw a meeting request from the Vice President of Human Resources. Subject: Urgent personnel matter. I sat in the HR office 10 minutes later. The VP, a woman named Linda who had always been warm to me, refused to make eye contact. Madeline, she said, shuffling papers on her desk. We have received some concerning communications regarding your professional conduct. From whom? I asked, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. We cannot disclose the source, but it concerns allegations of financial instability and potential misuse of confidential client data for personal leverage, Linda said. The board takes these things very seriously. Given the sensitive nature of your role managing high-value supply chains, we have to investigate. This is absurd, I said, realizing exactly what was happening. Douglas Hale sat on the board of 3 local charities. He golfed with the CEO of the bank that financed Marrowline's fleet. This is a personal vendetta because of a family dispute. We have to follow protocol, Linda said, her voice robotic. We are not suspending you, but we are restricting your access to the financial authorization systems until the investigation is cleared. It should only take a few weeks. I walked out of her office feeling like I had been dipped in ice water. They were not just coming for my marriage. They were coming for my livelihood. They wanted to make me unemployable. They wanted to prove that I was the risk they had always claimed I was. By lunch, The whispers had turned into stares. I heard snippets of conversation in the hallway. Gold digger, extortion, unstable. The Hales had spun a narrative, likely leaked through their country club network, which overlapped heavily with the executive class of Charlotte. The story was simple. The poor girl from nowhere had tried to blackmail the prominent Hale family, and now she was spiraling. I left work early. I could not breathe in that building. When I got to the townhouse, Graham's car was gone. I called him, straight to voicemail. I texted him, "Where are you? We need to talk." An hour later, I got a reply. It was not from Graham, it was from his phone, but the syntax was all wrong. Graham is staying at the estate for a few days. His mother has had a severe health episode due to the stress you caused. Do not contact him. He needs space to process your betrayal. I stared at the screen. Betrayal. I had exposed their theft, and they had successfully rebranded it as my betrayal. At 4 p.m, a courier knocked on the door. He handed me a thick envelope. It was not from a law firm. It was from a reputation management consultancy based in D.C. I tore it open. It was a cease and desist letter, but it was vague, designed to terrify rather than litigate. It accused me of defamatory statements regarding private financial matters and threatened a lawsuit for emotional distress and reputational damage, seeking damages in excess of $2 million. The source of the complaint was listed as the Hale Family Trust. They were using the very trust they had looted to pay for the lawyers to silence me about the looting. The irony would have been funny if it didn't feel like a noose tightening around my neck. I looked around the townhouse. The walls felt thin. The air felt stale. I realized with a sudden, chilling clarity that I could not stay here. This house was owned by the trust. Technically, Douglas could evict me, or worse, he could use his spare key, the one I knew he had, to plant something, to escalate this from a civil dispute to a criminal one. I went upstairs and pulled a suitcase from the closet. I did not pack everything. I packed my essentials, my documents, the black notebook, my laptop. I packed as if I were going on a business trip from which I might never return. I went to the garage. I knelt by the rear bumper of my car. Feeling underneath the chassis, I found it. A small, magnetic black box. Another tracker. I did not pull it off. If I removed it, they would know I was on the move. Instead, I pulled my car out of the garage and drove it down the street to the parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store. I parked it in a spot under a flickering light. Then, I called an Uber. "Where to?" the driver asked when he picked me up. "The Hyatt House on the other side of the city," I said. "And please, take the highway." I checked into the hotel under my maiden name, paying cash for a week in advance. I did not turn on my primary phone. I used the burner phone I had bought days ago to call Nina. "I am out," I said when she answered. "They are torching my reputation at work. They have Graham." "I heard," Nina said, her voice grim. "My boss asked me today if I knew you were having mental health struggles. Cynthia has been crying on the phone to every socialite in the directory. She is saying you threatened to destroy them if they did not pay you off." "It is a masterful lie," I said, pacing the small hotel room. "It covers their panic. If I release the recording now, they will say it is doctored, part of my extortion plot." "Where is Graham?" "They have him at the mansion. They are deprogramming him. They are probably telling him I am the one who stole the money." "You need to get to him," Nina said. "No," I said, stopping in front of the window. "I need him to come to me. If I chase him, I prove their point. I need him to see the cage." I spent the next 2 days in that hotel room, watching my life unravel from a distance. I saw my LinkedIn profile views skyrocket. I saw emails from concerned friends that felt more like fishing expeditions. On the 3rd day, I turned on my main phone for exactly 5 minutes. I sent one text message to Graham. "I am not at the townhouse. I am safe. I am not the one who lied to you about the $3 million. I am not the one who put a tracker on your wife. If you want to know the truth, meet me at the turning point of the loop trail at Freedom Park at 6. Come alone. If you are not there, I will assume you have chosen the lie." I turned the phone off immediately. The loop trail at Freedom Park was public, open, and impossible to bug without prior knowledge. I arrived at 5:45. I sat on a bench near the lake, watching the ducks fight over breadcrumbs. At 6 o'clock, he wasn't there. At 6:10, he wasn't there. I felt a cold hollowness expand in my chest. They had won. They had broken him. Then, at 6:15, I saw a figure walking hurriedly down the path. He looked terrible. He was wearing the same clothes he had worn at the club. He hadn't shaved. He looked like a man who had not slept in 72 hours. He sat down on the other end of the bench. He didn't look at me. "They took my phone," he said, his voice raspy. "I had to use the landline in the study to call a cab. I had to wait until Mom took her pills and passed out." "They told you I was crazy," I said. It wasn't a question. "They said you have been planning this for years," Graham said, looking at the water. "Dad said you set up the fake company to frame them. He said you doctored the bank statements." "And do you believe that?" Graham turned to look at me. His eyes were red-rimmed. "I don't know what to believe, Maddie. I really don't. But I know one thing. My dad is terrified. He has been shredding documents in his office for 2 days straight." I let out a breath. "That is the answer. Graham, innocent men do not shred." "He told me that if I came to see you, I was done," Graham said, his voice trembling. "He said he would cut me off completely. No trust, no inheritance, no family." "The trust is gone, Graham," I said gently. "Or most of it. He is threatening to cut you off from a dry well." "It is not just the money," Graham said, tears spilling over. "It is them. They are my parents. They are all I have known." "I know," I said, "and it hurts. It hurts like a death. But you have to choose. Do you want to be their accomplice, or do you want to be your own man?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a printout of my own bank statement, the one showing the $1.8 million. "I never wanted to use this," I said, sliding it across the bench. "But I need you to understand something. I do not need their money. I never did. I have my own. I stayed because I loved you. But I cannot stay if you are married to them." Graham looked at the number. He stared at it for a long time. The realization washed over him. The realization that his parents' entire narrative about me being a gold digger was mathematically impossible. You have almost $2 million? He stammered. "I do," I said. "And I made it without stealing from anyone." He looked back at the park entrance, terrified that his father might materialize from the bushes. "If I go with you," he whispered, "I lose them." "If you go back to them," I said, standing up, "you lose yourself, and you lose me, forever." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I had turned it back on. It was a text from Douglas. He must have realized Graham was gone. "He is with you. I know he is. Tell him he is dead to us. Tell him the locks are changed. Tell him he is a pauper." I showed the text to Graham. He read it. He read the words of the man who had raised him. The cold, transactional cruelty of it. Graham stood up. He took a deep breath of the cool evening air. He looked at the ducks, at the water, at the skyline of the city where he had lived his whole life as a prisoner of expectation. "He called me a pauper," Graham said, a strange, bitter smile touching his lips. "Are you?" I asked. Graham looked at me. He looked at the bank statement still sitting on the bench. Then he looked at his hand, where his wedding ring sat, the only ring he was wearing now that the class ring was gone. "No," Graham said. "I am not." He reached for my hand. His grip was weak, shaking, but it was there. "Let's go," he said. "Where?" "Anywhere," he said. "Just not back there." As we walked away from the park, leaving the Hales and their crumbling kingdom behind, I knew the war wasn't over. Douglas had fired a warning shot, but now he had lost his leverage. He had played his final card, disownment, and Graham hadn't folded. Now, Douglas Hale was a cornered animal, and cornered animals didn't just bite. They mauled. I squeezed Graham's hand. We were homeless. He was disowned, and my career was hanging by a thread. But for the first time in 4 years, I felt completely in control, because now I had nothing left to lose, and Douglas had everything to hide. The conference room in Tessa Ward's office was a study in modern intimidation. Unlike the Founders Club, with its plush velvet and shadows that hid secrets, this room was all glass and merciless natural light. There was nowhere to hide. We sat on one side of the white marble table, Graham, myself, and Tessa. On the other side sat Douglas, Cynthia, and their new counsel, a man named Mr. Blackwood, who looked like he had been hired specifically for his ability to frown and say no. It had been 4 days since Graham walked out of the park with me. 4 days of silence from the Hale estate, broken only by the transmission of legal summons. They wanted to settle. They wanted to contain the blast radius. "Let us be clear," Mr. Blackwood began, opening a file that looked significantly thinner than ours. "My clients are prepared to offer a concession. Mr. Hale is willing to reinstate Graham as a beneficiary of the trust, provided that Mrs. Hale signs the original waiver and a non-disclosure agreement regarding the internal administrative matters discussed last week." "Internal administrative matters," Tessa repeated, her voice dry. "That is a very polite way of saying embezzlement." "Alleged mismanagement," Blackwood corrected quickly, "which we deny. However, for the sake of family unity, Douglas is willing to overlook Graham's recent outburst." I looked at Douglas. He looked older than he had a week ago. His skin had a grayish cast, and he refused to look at his son. Cynthia sat beside him, rigid, clutching her purse as if someone were about to snatch it. She looked at me with a mixture of hatred and fear. "We are not here to ask for reinstatement," I said, my voice calm. "Graham does not care about the trust anymore. Do you, Graham?" Graham looked at his father. "No, I do not." "Then why are we here?" Douglas snapped, his patience fraying. "If you do not want the money, leave. Get out of my life." "We are here because you threatened to sue my client for defamation," Tessa interjected smoothly. "And because there are still outstanding liabilities. You claimed Madeline was a financial risk. You claimed she was seeking to defraud the family. We are here to put those claims to bed. Permanently." I slid my black notebook forward. I didn't open it yet. "Here are our terms," I said. "We will sign a mutual release, no lawsuits, no defamation claims, and Graham will voluntarily remove himself from the trust, waiving all rights to the $5 million, or whatever is left of it." Douglas's eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected us to walk away from the money so easily. "And in exchange?" "In exchange," I said, "we require a full, independent forensic audit of the Hale Family Trust for the last 10 years, to be conducted by a firm of our choosing. The results will be sealed, provided no criminal activity is found. If criminal activity is found, we reserve the right to report it to the IRS." The room went deadly silent. Douglas laughed. It was a nervous, hollow sound. "You want an audit? For a trust you are walking away from? That is ridiculous. It is a waste of resources." "It is a condition of the release," I said. "If you have nothing to hide, Douglas, an audit is just paperwork. It proves your innocence. It proves I was wrong about the shell companies." "We refuse," Douglas said instantly. "Absolutely not. The trust is private." "Then we go to discovery," Tessa said, leaning back in her chair. "If you sue Madeline for defamation, we have the right to subpoena the financial records to prove that her statements were true. Truth is an absolute defense against libel. So, we can do the audit quietly now, or we can do it publicly in court next month." Cynthia made a small, whimpering sound. She knew what a public court case would do. It would be in the papers. The society pages would eat them alive. Hale family accused of looting son's inheritance. They would be pariahs at the club before the opening statements were even read. "You are bluffing," Douglas said, though his hands were shaking slightly on the table. "You cannot afford a long legal battle. I know what Graham makes, and I know you are just an operations manager. I can bleed you dry in legal fees before you ever see a judge." This was the moment, the pivot point. That is where you are mistaken, Douglas, I said. I opened the black notebook. I removed a single, bound document. It was a statement of net worth, certified by a CPA yesterday. You have spent the last 4 years operating under a false assumption, I said, sliding the document across the marble. You assumed I married Graham because I needed security. You assumed I was a liability that needed to be managed. Douglas picked up the document. He adjusted his glasses. He read the summary page. I watched his eyes scan the lines. Cash and cash equivalents, real estate holdings, equities and securities. He stopped at the bottom line. 1.8 million, he whispered. What? Cynthia asked sharply. What is that? $1.8 million, Douglas repeated, looking up at me. Liquidity and assets. And that was before the market rally this morning, I added. I have no debt. My properties in Raleigh are fully tenanted and generate $6,000 a month in passive income. My portfolio is aggressive, but diversified. Cynthia snatched the paper from Douglas. She stared at it as if it were written in an alien language. This cannot be right, she stammered. You drive a Honda. You shop at Target. I drive a Honda because it is reliable, I said, and I shop at Target because I do not need to buy brand names to feel important. Unlike you, Cynthia, I do not wear my net worth. I bank it. I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the table. I brought my own folder. Douglas, I brought my own trust. I have never needed your money. I have never asked for a dime from you. In fact, if we look at the balance sheets, I am currently more solvent than you are, because my assets are real. Yours are leveraged against a house you are struggling to maintain. Douglas looked at the document, then at me. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had evaporated. He could not bully me with poverty. He could not threaten to starve us out. I could fund a legal war against him for 5 years and still have enough left over to buy his country club membership. Why didn't you tell us? Graham asked quietly, looking at me with a mixture of awe and hurt. Because I wanted to be your wife, I said to him, not your business partner, and I wanted to see if they could respect me without the price tag attached. Clearly, they couldn't. I turned back to Douglas. So here is the new reality, I said. I have the means to protect us. I have the means to expose you, and I have the patience to see it through. The audit is not a request anymore. It is the price of your survival. You would destroy your husband's family? Cynthia cried, tears welling up in her eyes. For what? Pride? For freedom, I said. Graham is drowning in that house. He is drowning in your expectations and your lies. I am offering him a life raft. I forbid it, Douglas said, standing up. Graham, you are not going with her. She is manipulative. She hid this from you. She lied to you for years. She didn't steal $3 million from me. Dad, Graham said. Graham stood up. He walked over to the window and looked out at the city. He took a deep breath. I am done, Graham said. I am signing the release. I am waiving the trust. You can keep whatever is left. Fix the roof. Pay the club dues. I do not care. Just leave us alone. You are making a mistake, Douglas shouted. You are walking away from your legacy. My legacy is a lie, Graham said, turning to face them. Madeline is real. She built something real. You just inherited something and broke it. He looked at me. I want to go, Maddie. We are leaving, I told Tessa. Draft the final separation of assets. We want nothing from the Hales. No money, no contact, total severance. I will have the papers ready by tomorrow, Tessa said, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. I stood up. I took my certified net worth statement back from Cynthia's trembling fingers. I placed it back in my black notebook. One last thing, I said, looking at Cynthia. The rumors stopped today. If I hear one more whisper at my office, or one more snide comment from your friends about me being a gold digger, I will publish this financial statement in the Charlotte Observer, and right next to it, I will publish the forensic accounting of where Graham's trust fund actually went. Do we understand each other? Cynthia nodded mutely. She looked small. The grandeur was gone. She was just an old woman in a fancy suit who had realized she was the poorest person in the room. Douglas sank back into his chair. He looked defeated. He knew the game was over. He had tried to crush a pawn and realized too late he was playing against a queen. "Goodbye, Douglas," I said. "Try to save enough for retirement. I hear the nursing homes are expensive." I walked out of the conference room, my heels clicking on the floor. Graham was right beside me. He didn't look back. We walked through the glass doors of the law firm and into the elevator. As the doors closed, cutting off the view of the high-rise office, Graham let out a long, shuddering breath. He leaned his head against the metal wall. "You really have 1.8 million?" he asked. 1.85, I corrected gently. "Interest accrued yesterday." He laughed. It was a genuine laugh, the first one I had heard in months. "God, I love you." "I love you too," I said. "Now, let's go get some tacos. I believe I am owed a birthday dinner." We were free. We were broke in the eyes of his family, but we were richer than they would ever be. We had the truth, and we had my folder. The end of the Hale dynasty did not happen with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating click of a forensic report hitting a glass table. 2 days after the confrontation at Tessa's office, we convened for the final execution of terms. This time, we were not debating, we were dictating. Douglas arrived looking like a man who had aged 10 years in 48 hours. His suit, usually immaculate, hung loosely on his frame. Cynthia was silent, her eyes red-rimmed and darting around the room like a trapped animal. They sat across from us, backed by Mr. Blackwood, who now looked less like their lawyer and more like their mortician. Tessa opened the meeting not with a greeting, but with a document. "We received the digital forensics report from the investigator this morning," Tessa said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Regarding the email sent to Madeline threatening to block the trust disbursement." Douglas waved a dismissive hand. "We already covered this. It was my assistant. A clerical error." "That is what you claimed," Tessa corrected. "However, the metadata tells a different story. The email was indeed sent from the domain Hale Trust Management, but it was not sent from the administrative office. It was authorized and transmitted from an IP address located at the Founders Club, specifically from the private Wi-Fi network of the Jefferson Room, logged in under the user ID DHHale01. I watched Douglas's face. The blood drained from it so fast it was almost fascinating. There was no Patricia to blame this time. He had sent the threat himself, likely between rounds of golf, thinking he was being clever. "This constitutes wire fraud," Tessa continued, leaning forward. "Attempting to coerce a signature on a financial instrument using digital deception, under federal statutes. This opens you up to a civil investigation and potential criminal charges. We have the logs, Douglas. We have the proof." "What do you want?" Douglas rasped. His voice was a shadow of its former boom. "You said you were walking away." "We are," I said. "But we are not walking away leaving you with the keys to the kingdom you stole. We are ensuring you can never hurt us, or anyone else, ever again." I turned to Graham. This was his moment. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn, leather-bound book. It wasn't a legal brief. It was his grandfather's original trust deed. "I read it," Graham said, his voice steady. "I read the whole thing. Dad, especially Article 9, Section C." Douglas looked at the book with horror. "Graham, do not do this." Article 9 states that if the trustee is found to be acting in bad faith, or if the corpus of the trust is diminished by more than 20% due to non-market factors, Graham recited from memory, the beneficiary has the right to invoke an immediate freeze of all assets pending a third-party audit. "You cannot freeze the trust," Cynthia shrieked, finding her voice. "We have mortgages. We have the club dues. If you freeze the accounts, the checks will bounce." "Then you should not have spent $3 million of my money on your lifestyle," Graham said. "I signed the petition this morning. Mom, the freeze is already active. The bank was notified an hour ago." Douglas slumped in his chair. It was over. The freeze meant they could not access the funds to pay their personal bills. The shell companies were choked off. Within 30 days, the house of cards would collapse. The mansion on Providence Road would go into foreclosure. The club membership would lapse. The illusion of the wealthy Hale family was dead. "You are ungrateful," Douglas whispered, staring at the table. "I built this name for you." "You sold the name to pay for the image," Graham retorted. Tessa slid the final document across the table. It was not the waiver they had wanted me to sign. It was a termination of relationship and non-disparagement agreement. "This is the new deal," I said. "I am not signing away my rights to the trust because, frankly, there is nothing left to claim. Instead, this document states that Graham is voluntarily removing himself as a beneficiary, effective immediately. In exchange, you agree to a permanent no-contact order. You will not contact us. You will not come to our home. You will not speak about us to your friends, your colleagues, or the press." "And if we refuse?" Mr. Blackwood asked, though he sounded like he already knew the answer. "Then I send the wire fraud evidence to the district attorney," I said simply, "and I publish the forensic audit of the shell companies online. I will let the whole of Charlotte know that Douglas Hale stole from his own son to buy status." Douglas looked at the pen sitting on the table. He looked at Cynthia, who was weeping silently into a silk handkerchief. He looked at the son he had tried to control and the daughter-in-law he had underestimated. He picked up the pen. His hand shook violently as he signed his name. He pushed the paper back to me. He didn't look up. "Get out," Douglas said. "Gladly," I replied. I signed the document. Graham signed it. We stood up. I picked up my black notebook, the folder I had brought to the war, the shield that had protected us when we had nothing else. "One piece of advice, Douglas," I said as we reached the door. "Cancel the country club membership yourself. It is less embarrassing than having your card declined at the bar." We walked out of the office and into the elevator. As we descended to the lobby, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was light. It was the weightlessness of freedom. We stepped out onto the sidewalk. The sun was shining on the streets of Charlotte. It was a Tuesday, just a regular Tuesday, but it felt like the first day of a new life. Graham took my hand. He wasn't the boy who was afraid to disappoint his parents anymore. He was a man who had walked through the fire and come out holding the hand of the only person who had ever truly fought for him. "Where do we go now?" he asked. "Wherever we want," I said. "We have $1.85 million, no toxic in-laws, and a craving for tacos." He smiled, and we began to walk. The Hales had wanted me to sign away my future. They wanted me to be small, manageable, and poor, but they forgot the most important rule of business and of life. Never underestimate the person who manages the logistics, because while they were playing for appearances, I was playing for keeps. And I won. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on how I handled Douglas and Cynthia. If you enjoyed seeing the Hales get what they deserved, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can reach even more people who need a little inspiration to stand up for themselves.